Olaf Tryggvason. On September 9th, 1000 AD, approximately 35-year-old Olaf Tryggvason disappeared during the Battle of Svolder, somewhere in the Baltic Sea. The Norwegian king had spent years forging himself into one of the most feared Viking rulers in Scandinavia through conquest, forced conversion, and naval warfare. Olaf rose from slavery and exile to seize the throne of Norway in 995. Medieval sagas described him as charismatic, violent, and fiercely ambitious. He destroyed pagan temples, executed rival jarls, and forced Christianity across entire regions at sword point. His campaigns unified much of Norway, but they also created enemies across Scandinavia. By the year 1000, a coalition had formed against him. Danish king Sweyn Forkbeard, Swedish king Olaf Skotkonung, and Norwegian jarl Eirik Hakonarson united to destroy Olaf before Norway became too powerful. The ambush came near the island of Svolder. Enemy fleets surrounded Olaf's ships one by one until only his massive longship, the Long Serpent, remained afloat. Arrows darkened the sky, while axes crashed against shields across blood-covered decks. Olaf's warriors died around him as enemy fighters stormed the ship from every direction. According to later sagas, Olaf refused surrender. As the final defenders collapsed, he leapt into the sea, fully armored, and vanished beneath the freezing water. Some believed he drowned instantly beneath the weight of chainmail and weapons. Others claimed he escaped into exile. No confirmed body was ever recovered. Olaf's disappearance shattered Norwegian independence for years. Denmark gained dominance across the region, while Christianity continued spreading through Scandinavia long after the king himself vanished. The sea that carried Olaf to power became the place where he disappeared forever. But another Viking ruler would die not by battle, but suddenly at the height of conquest. Sweyn Forkbeard. On February 3rd, 1014, approximately 40-year-old Sweyn Forkbeard died suddenly in Gainsborough, England, only weeks after becoming the first Viking king to conquer England outright. Sweyn spent decades devastating the English coastline through raids, invasions, and tribute wars. He was the son of Harald Bluetooth and one of the architects of Denmark's expansion during the late 10th century. Monasteries burned in his wake, while kingdoms paid silver to avoid destruction. By 1013, England had nearly collapsed beneath constant Viking war. King Athelred fled into exile, while Sweyn seized the English throne for himself. But the conquest came during a brutal winter, and England remained unstable beneath Danish occupation. Only weeks after his victory, Sweyn suddenly collapsed in Gainsborough. Later chroniclers claimed Saint Edmund himself appeared from the dead and struck Sweyn down as punishment for years of violence against Christian England. Other accounts suggested illness, exhaustion, or stroke. Whatever the cause, the conqueror who spent decades invading England died only weeks after taking the crown. His death nearly destroyed the Danish conquest immediately. English nobles rebelled, Athelred returned from exile, and Viking control threatened to collapse into chaos. Sweyn conquered England at the height of his power and died before he could truly rule it. Eric Bloodaxe. On approximately 954 AD, around 50-year-old Eric Bloodaxe was killed at the Battle of Stainmore in northern England after years of exile, betrayal, and war. Eric was one of the last great Viking kings of Northumbria, and the son of Harald Fairhair, the ruler credited with unifying Norway. His nickname, Bloodaxe, came from both his brutality in battle and the murders of several of his own brothers during struggles for succession. Driven from Norway, Eric seized the Viking kingdom of York and ruled Northumbria through fear and military strength. Medieval chroniclers described him as violent even by Viking standards, but his rule in England remained unstable. Anglo-Saxon rulers sought to drive Viking power out permanently, while rival Norse factions questioned Eric's leadership. By the mid-10th century, alliances turned against him from every direction. The final battle came at Stainmore. Eric and his remaining warriors rode into an ambush laid by English forces loyal to King Edred. The fighting became chaotic and close. Sagas claimed Eric fought until the very end before an enemy spear or axe struck him down in the middle of the slaughter. His death ended Viking rule in Northumbria forever. York fell fully under English control, and the last major Norse kingdom in England disappeared with him. The warrior, remembered as Bloodaxe, died surrounded by enemies in a foreign land he could never truly hold. Ragnar Lodbrok. According to legendary accounts set around the late 9th century, the Viking warlord Ragnar Lodbrok was executed in Northumbria after a failed invasion of England. Ragnar became one of the most famous figures in Norse legend. Stories described him as a dragon slayer, king, explorer, and conqueror whose raids terrorized England and Francia. Whether entirely historical or partially mythological, his legend shaped Viking identity for centuries. By his later years, Ragnar's influence had declined, while younger rulers rose around him. Determined to reclaim glory, Ragnar launched another invasion of England with only a small force. The expedition failed catastrophically when his ships were wrecked and his warriors overwhelmed by King Ella of Northumbria. Ragnar was captured alive. According to later sagas, Ella ordered the Viking leader thrown into a pit filled with venomous snakes. Ragnar reportedly died slowly while reciting defiant final words, promising vengeance from his sons. Whether the execution happened exactly as described remains debated by historians, but the revenge that followed became terrifyingly real. Within years, Ragnar's sons led the great heathen army into England. Northumbrian kingdoms collapsed beneath Viking invasion, while King Ella himself was reportedly executed through the ritual known as the Blood Eagle. Ragnar's death transformed a defeated warlord into one of the greatest legends of the Viking world. The king who died in a snake pit became more powerful in death than he had ever been in life. Sigurd Eysteinsson. Around the late 9th century, Sigurd Eysteinsson, the Viking ruler of Orkney, better known as Sigurd the Mighty, died from an infected wound caused by the severed head of his defeated enemy. Sigurd ruled the Orkney Islands during the height of Norse expansion across Scotland and the North Atlantic. He was feared for his raids and campaigns against rival Scottish rulers. One of those rivals was Mael Brigte, a local Scottish noble remembered in Norse sagas as Bucktooth. The conflict between them ended in deception and massacre. According to the Orkneyinga saga, Sigurd arranged a meeting with Mael Brigte under promises of equal numbers. Instead, Sigurd secretly brought twice as many warriors and slaughtered the Scots during the ambush. After the battle, Sigurd ordered Mael Brigte's head severed and tied to his saddle as a trophy. But as Sigurd rode home, the dead man's protruding tooth repeatedly scraped against the Viking ruler's leg. The wound became infected, and medieval medicine offered little hope once fever spread through the body. Sigurd the Mighty died not from battle, but from infection caused by the head of the man he betrayed. The warlord who humiliated his enemy carried death home with him, unknowingly tied to his own horse. But another Viking leader would become infamous for cruelty so severe that even his death remained mysterious centuries later. Ivar the Boneless. Around 873 AD, the Viking ruler Ivar the Boneless died somewhere in Anglo-Saxon England after years of conquest and terror across the British Isles. Ivar was one of the leaders of the Great Heathen Army, the massive Viking force that invaded England during the 9th century. Medieval sources described him as intelligent, ruthless, and terrifyingly unpredictable. His nickname, the Boneless, remains debated by historians. Some believed he suffered from a physical disability, while others argued the name referred to flexibility, brutality, or even impotence. Under Ivar's leadership, Viking armies captured major Anglo-Saxon cities and destroyed kingdoms across England. Monasteries burned, while rulers who resisted faced execution. According to later accounts, Ivar orchestrated the execution of King Ella through the Blood Eagle, a ritual in which the victim's ribs were cut open and lungs pulled outward through the back. But despite surviving countless campaigns, Ivar's own death came quietly. Some chronicles suggested illness ended his life suddenly during the Viking occupation of England. Others claim disease spread through his camp after years of constant warfare. Centuries later, local legends claimed Ivar ordered himself buried where invading enemies would first land, believing his presence would protect Viking territory even after death. The conqueror who helped shatter Anglo-Saxon England died under mysterious circumstances, his legend surviving longer than the kingdoms he destroyed. But another Viking raider would survive nearly every battle of his life, only to disappear into uncertainty at the very end. Magnus Barefoot. On August 24th, 1103, approximately 30-year-old Magnus Barefoot was killed during a campaign in Ulster, Ireland, while attempting to expand Norwegian power across the Irish Sea. Magnus earned his nickname from adopting Gaelic-style clothing during campaigns in Scotland and Ireland. He sought to restore the overseas Viking Empire once controlled by earlier Norse rulers. By the early 12th century, Viking influence across the British Isles had weakened significantly. Magnus hoped military conquest could restore Norway's dominance abroad. Instead, the campaign became disastrous. While leading troops through marshland in Ulster, Magnus and his men were ambushed by Irish forces. Arrows rained into the Norwegians as fighting collapsed into chaos. According to chronicles, one arrow pierced Magnus through both legs above the knees before another struck his body. The king continued fighting briefly before collapsing from blood loss. His death ended Norway's final major attempt to rebuild a Western Viking empire. Magnus Barefoot died chasing the fading shadow of Viking expansion, centuries after its height had already passed. But the final ruler on this list would die peacefully while ruling one of the largest empires the Vikings ever created, Hæstein. Around the early 10th century, the Viking warlord Hæstein vanished from history after decades of raids, deception, and survival across Europe. Hæstein became infamous as one of the most cunning Viking raiders of the age. Frankish chroniclers described him as relentless, adaptable, and nearly impossible to kill. For years, Hæstein devastated regions of Francia, Spain, and the Mediterranean. Legends claimed he once faked his own death to infiltrate a city by requesting Christian burial inside its walls before launching a surprise attack from his coffin. Despite surviving countless campaigns, Hæstein's final years became increasingly uncertain. The Viking world itself was changing. Kingdoms strengthened defenses while Christianity spread deeper into Scandinavia. The age of massive Viking raiding armies slowly began fading. Unlike many warlords of his era, Hæstein did not die gloriously in battle. Instead, historical references to him simply stopped. Some accounts claimed he retired quietly in Scandinavia. Others suggested he died during another raid somewhere far from home. No reliable record survives describing exactly how one of the Viking Age's most feared raiders met his end. The man who spent his life appearing unexpectedly across Europe vanished from history almost as suddenly as he entered it.